The dust kicked up in choking clouds as Elena Sawyer fought against the ropes binding her wrists, her screams reduced to desperate whimpers by the filthy bandana tied tight across her mouth. Vincent Fletcher had been tracking the Dalton gang for 3 days when he heard it, a sound so faint most men would have dismissed it as wind through the canyon. But his years on the trail had taught him to listen with more than just his ears. He reined his sorrel mare to a stop and tilted his head, catching that muffled cry again, and something in his chest tightened like a fist. It was late spring in 1882, and the Arizona Territory stretched out harsh and unforgiving under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Vincent had been working cattle drives and odd ranch jobs since he was 16, and now at 26 he knew the land between Old Tucson and the Mexican border better than most men knew their own homesteads. The Dalton gang had been terrorizing small settlements for months, stealing cattle, robbing stages, and worse, much worse. The territorial marshal had put together a posse 2 weeks back, but Vincent had been the only one willing to follow the trail this far south into Apache country. He dismounted silently, his boots making barely a whisper against the sandy ground as he led his horse into a cluster of mesquite trees. The sound came again, clearer now, and with it, the rough laughter of men who thought themselves safe in the middle of nowhere. Vincent checked his Colt revolver, making sure each chamber was loaded, then began to pick his way up the rocky incline toward the source of the noise. Elena had been traveling with her aunt and uncle from their ranch outside Old Tucson to visit family in Tombstone when the gang had struck. They had come out of nowhere, masked and firing shots into the air, sending the horses into a panicked frenzy. Her uncle had tried to reach for his rifle and paid for it with his life. Her aunt had fainted dead away, and Elena had been dragged from the wagon kicking and screaming. That had been yesterday morning, and since then she had been tied up, gagged, and thrown over the back of a horse like a sack of grain. The men had barely spoken to her except to laugh and make comments that turned her blood to ice. Now they had stopped to make camp in a narrow canyon, thinking themselves clever for choosing a spot with only one way in or out. There were 4 of them, and Elena recognized the leader as Jack Dalton himself, a man whose face appeared on wanted posters throughout the territory. The reward was $500, dead or alive. She had memorized that poster in the marshal's office in Old Tucson, never imagining she would see that cruel face up close. Vincent crept along the canyon rim, his heart pounding but his hands steady. He could see them now, gathered around a small fire, passing a bottle between them. The girl was tied to a cottonwood tree about 20 feet from the fire, her dark hair hanging in tangles around her face, the gag still firmly in place. Even from this distance, he could see she was young, probably not more than 22 or 23, and the fear in her eyes made his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. He could not take all 4 men at once, not in a straight fight. He needed to be smart about this, needed to wait for the right moment. Vincent settled into position behind a boulder, his rifle across his knees, and prepared to wait. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red. Soon it would be dark, and darkness would give him the advantage he needed. Elena had stopped struggling against her bonds. Her wrists were raw and bleeding, and she knew fighting would only make things worse. Instead, she focused on staying calm, on watching and listening. The men were getting drunker as the evening wore on, their voices growing louder, their movements clumsier. She caught bits of their conversation, plans to cross into Mexico once they had sold the cattle they had stolen from various ranches. They argued about whether to take her with them or leave her behind, and she tried not to think about what either option might mean. The sun dropped below the canyon rim, and the temperature began to fall. One of the men, a stocky fellow with a thick beard, stood up and walked toward her. Elena pressed herself back against the tree, her breath coming fast and panicked through her nose. He reached down and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him, and said something crude that made the others laugh. Then he pulled a knife from his belt. Vincent's finger moved to the trigger of his rifle, but the man only cut the gag away from Elena's mouth before stumbling back to the fire. She gasped for air, working her jaw, and Vincent could see tears streaming down her face. He watched as she tried to speak, her voice hoarse and cracking. "Please," she said, and the word carried up to where Vincent crouched in the gathering darkness. "Please, just let me go. My family will pay you. Whatever you want." "Your family?" Jack Dalton laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Sweetheart, your uncle is dead and your aunt probably wandered off into the desert by now if the buzzards did not get her first. Ain't nobody coming for you." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She had hoped, desperately hoped, that her aunt might have survived, might have made it to the nearest town for help. But looking at Dalton's face, she knew he was telling the truth. She was alone out here with these men, and no one was coming to save her. Except someone was. Vincent waited until full dark had fallen and the men had eaten a meager supper of beans and hardtack. The bottle was nearly empty now, and 3 of the 4 men were showing serious signs of intoxication. Only Dalton himself seemed relatively sober, sitting apart from the others and cleaning his guns with methodical precision. Vincent would have to deal with him first. He worked his way down from the rim, moving like a shadow, using every bit of cover the rocks and sparse vegetation provided. It took him nearly an hour to get into position, circling around behind where the horses were picketed. He calmed them with soft words and gentle hands, making sure they would not give him away with nervous whinnying. Then he moved toward the camp itself. Elena saw him first, a figure detaching itself from the darkness, tall and lean, moving with the kind of careful grace that spoke of a man who knew how to survive in hard country. For a moment she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but then the firelight caught his face, and she saw he was real. He was perhaps a few years older than she was, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled over his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, denim pants and a worn chambray shirt, with a leather vest and a battered hat pulled low over his eyes. But what caught her attention most were his eyes themselves, pale blue and intense, focused entirely on the men around the fire. He raised one finger to his lips, a clear signal for her to stay silent, and she managed the smallest nod. Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure the men would hear it, but they were too busy arguing about which route to take into Mexico. Vincent moved closer, his hand on the grip of his revolver. Everything happened at once. One of the drunk men stood up to relieve himself and nearly walked right into Vincent. There was a moment of mutual surprise. Then the man opened his mouth to shout, and Vincent hit him with the butt of his gun, dropping him like a stone, but the damage was done. The other men scrambled to their feet, reaching for their weapons. "Federal Marshal," Vincent lied, his voice carrying across the camp. "Drop your guns and put your hands up." For a heartbeat it seemed like they might comply. Then Jack Dalton smiled, that cruel expression that had sent fear through dozens of victims, and went for his gun. Vincent was faster. His shot took Dalton in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying into the darkness. The other 2 men opened fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the night, and Vincent dove behind the pile of saddles and supplies the gang had stacked near the horses. Elena screamed, unable to help herself, and tried desperately to work free of her bonds. The ropes were tight, too tight, and all she succeeded in doing was making her wrists bleed more. Bullets thudded into the saddles Vincent was using for cover, and she heard him return fire, measured shots that spoke of a man who knew how to use his ammunition wisely. One of the outlaws went down with a cry, clutching his leg. The other kept firing wildly, panic making him careless, until Vincent's next shot caught him in the chest, and he crumpled without a sound. Jack Dalton had managed to retrieve his gun with his good hand and was bringing it to bear on Vincent's position when Elena did the only thing she could think of. She screamed his name. "Behind you!" Vincent whirled and fired in one smooth motion, and Jack Dalton fell backward with a hole between his eyes. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the moaning of the man shot in the leg and the nervous stamping of the horses. Vincent stood slowly, checking to make sure all threats were neutralized, then holstered his gun and ran to Elena. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough with concern as he pulled a knife from his belt and began sawing at her ropes. Did they harm you? I am all right, she managed, though her voice shook. I am all right. The ropes fell away, and Elena would have collapsed if Vincent had not caught her. Her legs were numb from being tied so long, and her whole body was trembling with shock and relief. He supported her weight easily, one arm around her waist, and guided her away from the tree and the gruesome scene near the fire. Can you walk? He asked gently. We need to secure the camp and tend to your injuries. Elena nodded, though in truth she was not sure of anything at the moment. She leaned heavily on this stranger who had appeared out of the night like an avenging angel and let him help her to a spot away from the bodies. He eased her down onto a bedroll, then went to deal with the surviving outlaw, the one shot in the leg. You are going to live, Vincent told the man, wrapping the wound tightly with strips torn from a spare shirt. But you are going to jail. If you give me any trouble, I will leave you here for the coyotes. Understood? The man nodded frantically, all the fight gone out of him. Vincent tied him securely to one of the trees, then set about the grim work of dealing with the dead. Elena watched him through a haze of exhaustion and shock, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he never wasted motion or energy. When he had done what he could, he came back to her with a canteen and a relatively clean cloth. Let me see your wrists, he said, crouching down beside her. His voice was gentler now, the hard edge gone. They look bad. Elena held out her hands and winced as he carefully cleaned the rope burns. His touch was surprisingly tender for a man with such calloused hands, and she found herself studying his face in the firelight. He had strong features, a straight nose and a firm jaw with a few days' worth of stubble, and those striking pale blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. What is your name? She asked quietly. Vincent Fletcher, he said, not looking up from his work. I have been tracking these men for days, never expected to find them with a hostage. Elena Sawyer, she replied. They killed my uncle. I do not know what happened to my aunt. Vincent's hands stilled for just a moment, then continued wrapping her wrists with strips of clean cloth. I am sorry, truly. These were bad men, and they have hurt a lot of people. You saved my life, Elena said, and suddenly tears were streaming down her face again, all the fear and grief and relief crashing over her at once. They were going to kill me. Or worse, and you saved me. Vincent looked up then, and the expression in his eyes was so full of compassion it made her cry harder. He did not tell her to stop, or to be strong. He just finished bandaging her wrists, then sat down beside her and let her cry until she had no tears left. The night stretched on, cold and clear, with a million stars overhead. Vincent kept the fire going and made coffee, strong and bitter, and gave Elena his jacket when he saw her shivering. They did not talk much at first. Elena was too drained, and Vincent seemed content to simply keep watch, his rifle across his knees, his gaze constantly scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. As the hours passed and the shock began to wear off, Elena found her voice again. You said you were tracking them. Are you a marshal? Vincent shook his head. Just a cowhand, mostly. But I was in old Tucson when word came that the Daltons had hit another ranch. The marshal was putting together a posse, and I volunteered. Why? Elena asked. It is dangerous work, going after men like that. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I grew up on a ranch about 50 miles north of old Tucson, he said finally. When I was 15, raiders came through. They killed my father and burned our house. My mother and little sister barely escaped with their lives. The men who did it were never caught, never brought to justice. So when I hear about men like the Daltons, men who hurt innocent people and think they can get away with it, I guess I feel like I have to do something. Elena absorbed this, understanding dawning. I am sorry about your family. It was a long time ago, Vincent said, though she could hear the pain still there beneath the surface. My mother remarried eventually, a good man from Prescott. My sister is grown now, married with children of her own. They are doing well, but I never forgot that feeling of helplessness, of watching our world burn and not being able to stop it. You stopped it tonight, Elena said softly. You saved me. Vincent looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment, something neither could have named, but both felt. I am glad I heard you, he said. I almost missed it. You were so far away. And that gag muffled the sound, but something made me stop and listen. I am glad you did, Elena said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They sat together through the night, talking in fits and starts, learning about each other in the way of people thrown together by circumstance. Elena told him about her life on the ranch, about her love of horses and books, about her plans to become a teacher. Vincent told her about his years on the cattle trails, about the places he had seen and the men he had worked with, about his dream of someday having his own spread. When dawn broke over the canyon rim, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Vincent stood and stretched. We need to get you back to old Tucson, he said. Can you ride? Elena nodded, though in truth she was not sure. Her body ached in a dozen places, and exhaustion pulled at her like a weight. But she knew they could not stay here, not with dead men and the threat of more trouble. Vincent saddled his mare and one of the outlaw's horses, a steady-looking buckskin, then helped Elena mount. She swayed in the saddle but held on, determined not to show weakness. They left the canyon as the sun climbed higher, Vincent leading the way with the surviving outlaw tied and mounted on another horse. They also had the bodies wrapped and strapped to the remaining horses because Vincent insisted they needed to be brought back for identification and so the families of their victims could have some closure. Elena tried not to look at the grim bundles, focusing instead on the landscape around them. The Arizona territory was beautiful in its own harsh way, all red rocks and green cactus with mountains purple in the distance. Hawks circled overhead, and once they saw a small herd of antelope bounding away across the scrubland. Vincent rode with easy competence, clearly at home in the saddle, and Elena found herself watching him more than the scenery. He had saved her life, risked his own without hesitation, and he was asking nothing in return. In her experience, men always wanted something, always expected payment of some kind for their actions. But Vincent just rode in silence, occasionally checking to make sure she was all right, his focus on getting them safely back to town. By midday, the heat was brutal, and they stopped in the shade of a rocky outcrop to rest the horses and drink from their canteens. Elena's head was pounding, and she felt dizzy and sick. Vincent noticed immediately and made her sit down, wetting his bandana and laying it across the back of her neck. You need to tell me if you feel faint, he said firmly. Heat stroke is nothing to play around with out here. I am fine, Elena insisted, though she clearly was not. You are not fine, Vincent countered. You have been through hell. You have barely eaten or drunk anything, and you are pushing yourself too hard. Rest here. We will wait out the worst of the heat before we go on. Elena wanted to argue, but she did not have the energy. She leaned back against the rock and closed her eyes, feeling the coolness of the wet cloth against her skin. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, Vincent was gently shaking her shoulder, and the shadows had shifted, indicating several hours had passed. Sorry, she mumbled. I did not mean to sleep so long. You needed it, Vincent said. How do you feel? Better, Elena admitted. Hungry, actually. Vincent smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. I have some jerky and hardtack. Not much, but it will hold you until we can get a proper meal in old Tucson. They ate the simple food, and Elena found it was the best thing she had ever tasted. Strange how near death made you appreciate the small things, the basic comforts. She caught Vincent watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something soft and almost tender, and she felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or exhaustion. They rode on as the afternoon shadows lengthened, covering ground at a steady pace. Vincent told her they should reach Old Tucson by late the next day if they kept moving. That meant another night camping in the open, but Elena found she was not as afraid as she might have been. With Vincent there, she felt safe in a way she had not felt since before the attack. As dusk approached, they found a good spot to camp near a seasonal creek that still had water flowing. Vincent saw to the horses first, making sure they were watered and picketed securely, then built a fire and heated water for coffee. Elena watched him work, marveling at how self-sufficient he was, how comfortable in this harsh environment. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked as he mixed flour and water to make simple biscuits in a pan over the fire. "The trail," Vincent said. "I did my first cattle drive when I was 16. Learned real quick that if you did not know how to take care of yourself, you did not survive long. The older hands taught me, and I paid attention." "You never wanted to do anything else?" Elena asked. "Go east, maybe, to the cities?" Vincent shook his head. "This is my home. The wide open spaces, the sky that goes on forever. I would suffocate in a city." "What about you? Have you always lived in Arizona?" "I was born in Missouri," Elena said. "But my parents brought me out here when I was 7. They wanted land, space to build something. My father said the future was in the West." Her voice caught. "He died 3 years ago, pneumonia. My mother passed the year after. I have been living with my aunt and uncle since then." Vincent looked at her with sympathy. "You have had a hard few years." "Life is hard out here for everyone," Elena said, trying to sound philosophical. "But it is beautiful too. I would not want to be anywhere else, even after everything that has happened." They ate the simple meal in companionable silence, then sat by the fire as night fell. The stars came out in their millions, so bright and close it seemed you could reach up and touch them. Elena found herself relaxing, the constant fear that had gripped her since the kidnapping finally beginning to ease. "Vincent," she said after a while. "Yes?" "Thank you. I know I already said it, but I do not think I can say it enough. You saved my life, and I will never forget that." He looked uncomfortable, like he did not know how to respond to her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same, Yelby," he said. "That is not true," Elena said firmly. "Most men would have ridden the other way, not wanting to risk their lives for a stranger. But you followed those men into danger to help someone you did not even know. That takes courage. It takes character." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I could not live with myself if I had ridden away," he said finally. "Knowing you were out there, scared and hurting, and I had done nothing to help. Some things you do because they are right, not because they are easy." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She found herself studying Vincent's profile in the flickering light, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled at his temples. He was handsome, she realized, in a quiet, unassuming way. But more than that, he was good, truly good, in a way that seemed rare in the world. The night passed peacefully, with Vincent taking the watch while Elena slept. She woke once in the dark hours before dawn and saw him sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, staring out into the darkness with those watchful eyes. She felt a surge of gratitude and something else, something stronger and more complicated, before sleep claimed her again. The next day dawned clear and hot. They were on the trail early, and Vincent set a faster pace now that they were closer to civilization. The landscape began to change, becoming less harsh, with more vegetation and signs of human habitation. They passed a small ranch around midday, and Vincent stopped to water the horses and ask directions, confirming they were on the right track for Old Tucson. By late afternoon, Elena could see the town in the distance, a cluster of adobe buildings and wooden structures shimmering in the heat. She felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that they would soon be safe, surrounded by other people and the trappings of civilization. Disappointment because it meant this strange, intense journey with Vincent was coming to an end. They rode into Old Tucson as the sun was setting, and their arrival caused an immediate stir. People came out of buildings to stare at the procession, the cowboy and the disheveled young woman, the tied outlaw and the bodies strapped to horses. Someone ran to get the marshal, and within minutes they were surrounded. Marshal Tom Garrett was a grizzled man in his 50s who had seen just about everything the territory could throw at him. He took one look at Jack Dalton's body and let out a low whistle. "I will be damned. You got them. You actually got them." Vincent dismounted and helped Elena down, keeping a supportive hand on her elbow as she swayed on her feet. "This is Miss Elena Sawyer. She was their prisoner. She needs medical attention and rest." The marshal nodded and called for the doctor, then turned his attention to the surviving outlaw. As men moved to take charge of the prisoner and the bodies, Vincent guided Elena toward the doctor's office, ignoring the questions being shouted at them from all sides. Dr. Harrison was a kind-faced man who reminded Elena of her late father. He examined her gently, cleaned and rebandaged her wrists, checked her for signs of serious injury or illness, and pronounced her battered but fundamentally sound. "You need rest, young lady. Good food, clean water, and time to heal. Do you have somewhere to go?" Elena's heart sank. She had been so focused on survival that she had not thought about the practical realities. Her aunt and uncle's ranch was a day's ride away, and she had no way to know if her aunt had survived or if there was anything left there for her. She had a little money sewn into the lining of her dress, but not enough for more than a few nights at a boarding house. Vincent, who had been waiting outside, stepped into the room. "She can stay at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house," he said. "I will cover the cost until she can make arrangements." "You do not have to do that," Elena protested. "You have already done so much." "I want to," Vincent said simply. "Please, let me help." The doctor looked between them with knowing eyes but said nothing, just finished his work and gave Elena a bottle of laudanum in case the pain in her wrists became too much. Vincent helped her walk the 3 blocks to Mrs. Henderson's establishment, a clean, well-maintained boarding house that catered to respectable travelers. Mrs. Henderson herself answered the door, a plump woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took in Elena's disheveled appearance and Vincent's protective stance and drew her own conclusions. The poor dear. Come in. I have a room available, nice and quiet. I will have hot water sent up so you can bathe, and I will bring you a tray of food." Vincent paid for a week's lodging up front over Elena's protests, then walked her upstairs to the room. It was small but clean, with a real bed and fresh linens, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. After days of being tied up and sleeping on the ground, it looked like paradise. "I will come by tomorrow to check on you," Vincent said from the doorway. "The marshal will want to talk to you, get your statement about what happened. But that can wait until you have rested." Elena nodded, suddenly feeling awkward. "Vincent, I do not know how to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," he said. "Just focus on getting better." He left, and Elena sank down onto the bed, her mind whirling. Within an hour, Mrs. Henderson had sent up a tub and hot water, and Elena scrubbed away days of dirt and fear, washing her hair 3 times before she felt clean. Then she ate the simple but delicious meal that was brought to her and fell into bed, sleeping deeper and better than she had in weeks. She woke the next morning to sunshine streaming through the window and the sounds of the town going about its business below. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then memory returned, and with it a sense of relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She was safe. She was alive. And Vincent Fletcher had made it possible. There was a knock on the door, and Mrs. Henderson entered with another tray of food. "Good morning, dear. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," Elena said honestly. "That young man, Mr. Fletcher, he is downstairs asking after you." Says he wants to make sure you are well before the marshal comes by. Elena's heart did a little flip. Tell him I will be down in a few minutes. She dressed quickly in the spare dress Mrs. Henderson had lent her, her own clothes being too dirty and torn to wear. She brushed out her long dark hair and pinned it up, then went downstairs to find Vincent waiting in the parlor. He stood when he saw her, his hat in his hands, and his expression was relieved. You look better. I feel better, Elena said. She wanted to go to him, to thank him properly, but something held her back. The formality of the boarding house setting, perhaps, or Mrs. Henderson's watchful eyes. They sat in the parlor and talked quietly while they waited for the marshal. Vincent told her that the surviving outlaw had given a full confession, hoping for leniency, and that the reward money for the Daltons would be coming to him. Elena told him she had been thinking about what to do next, and she thought she should ride out to her aunt and uncle's ranch to see what had happened there. I will take you, Vincent said immediately. You should not go alone. You have done enough, Elena protested. You have your own life to get back to. Vincent leaned forward, his pale blue eyes intense. Elena, I am not leaving you to deal with this by yourself. Let me help. Please. There was something in his voice, in his eyes, that made Elena's breath catch. She nodded slowly. All right, thank you. Marshal Garrett arrived a few minutes later and took Elena's statement, writing down everything she could remember about the kidnapping and her time with the Daltons. It was hard to relive, and more than once she had to stop and collect herself. Vincent sat beside her the whole time, a silent source of support, and she found herself drawing strength from his presence. When the marshal was finished, he thanked her and told her he would keep her informed of any developments. Then he turned to Vincent. The territorial governor is going to want to thank you personally for bringing in the Daltons. That reward money should come through in a few weeks. $500 for Jack Dalton, $200 each for the others. That is $900 total. Vincent nodded, but Elena could tell the money did not mean much to him. He had done this because it was right, not for the reward. Over the next few days, Vincent and Elena spent more and more time together. He showed her around old Tucson, introducing her to people he knew, making sure she had everything she needed. They took meals together at the local restaurant, and Elena found herself looking forward to these times, to the easy conversation and the way Vincent made her feel safe and valued. She learned more about him during these days. He told her about his years on the cattle trails, the hard work and harder men, but also the beauty of driving a herd across open country under a sky full of stars. He told her about his dreams of owning his own ranch someday, a place where he could raise cattle and horses and build something lasting. He spoke with such passion that Elena could see it all clearly, and she found herself wanting to be part of that dream. Vincent, for his part, was drawn to Elena in ways he had not expected. She was strong and brave, refusing to let what had happened to her break her spirit. She was smart too, well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. And she was beautiful, though he did not think she fully realized it. When she smiled, really smiled, it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. On the fourth day after their arrival in old Tucson, they rode out to Elena's aunt and uncle's ranch. It was a somber journey, both of them dreading what they might find. The ranch was about 15 miles outside of town, a modest spread with a small adobe house and several outbuildings. What they found was heartbreaking. The wagon Elena had been traveling in was still on the road where the attack had happened, one wheel broken, the contents scattered. Her uncle's body had been removed, Vincent learned from a neighboring rancher they met on the way, and buried in the town cemetery, but there was no sign of Elena's aunt. They searched the area for hours, calling out, looking for any trace. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, they found her. She had wandered off the road, probably in shock, and collapsed under a mesquite tree about half a mile away. She was dead, had been for days, and the sight of her body brought Elena to her knees. Vincent held her while she sobbed, his arms strong and steady around her, and did not try to offer empty platitudes. He just held her and let her grieve. When she had cried herself out, he helped her stand, and they made arrangements to have her aunt's body brought back to Old Tucson for proper burial. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and legal matters. Elena's aunt and uncle had left her everything, the ranch and what little money they had saved. It was not much, but it was something. The ranch itself was in need of work, the buildings run down, and the fences in disrepair. It would take money and effort to make it viable again. Elena sat in the lawyer's office in Old Tucson, trying to process everything, and felt overwhelmed. She was 22 years old, alone in the world, with a broken down ranch and no idea how to run it. She had been planning to become a teacher, not a rancher. The future that had seemed so clear just weeks ago now felt impossibly uncertain. Vincent found her on the porch of the boarding house that evening, staring out at the street without really seeing it. He sat down beside her without a word, just his presence a comfort. "I do not know what to do," Elena said quietly. "The ranch is too much for me to handle alone. I should probably sell it, use the money to go back east and train as a teacher like I planned. But that ranch was my family's dream. It feels like giving up." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "What do you want to do? Not what you think you should do, but what you actually want?" Elena turned to look at him, and in the fading light his eyes were the color of the summer sky. "I want to stay," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I want to make the ranch work. I want to honor my family by making their dream real, but I do not know if I can do it alone." "You do not have to do it alone," Vincent said softly. Their eyes met and held, and Elena felt her heart start to pound. "What are you saying?" Vincent took a deep breath. "I am saying that over these past days, I have come to care for you. More than care for you, if I am being honest. I know it is too soon. I know you are grieving and dealing with so much. But I want to help you with the ranch. I want to be there, working beside you, building something together. If you will have me." Elena's breath caught. "Vincent, I care for you too. You saved my life, and then you stayed when you could have left. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. But I cannot ask you to give up your own dreams to help me with mine." "You are not asking, I am offering," Vincent said. He reached out and took her hand, careful of her healing wrists. "Elena, I have been drifting for years, working other men's ranches, driving their cattle, building their dreams. When I am with you, I feel like I have finally found where I belong. Your dream can be my dream, if you want that too." Elena felt tears starting, but they were not tears of grief this time. "I do want that. I want you to stay. I want us to build something together." Vincent smiled, that rare, transforming smile, and lifted her hand to his lips. "Then that is what we will do." The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was gentle and chaste, but it sent warmth flooding through Elena's whole body. She squeezed his hand, hardly daring to believe this was real, that something good could come out of so much tragedy. Over the following weeks, Vincent and Elena began the work of restoring the ranch. Vincent moved out of his rented room and into one of the outbuildings on the property, maintaining propriety even as they worked side by side every day. He proved to be everything Elena could have hoped for in a partner, knowledgeable about ranching, hardworking, and patient with her when she made mistakes. They repaired fences and buildings, worked on breaking some of the wild horses that roamed the area, and bought a small herd of cattle with Elena's inheritance and part of Vincent's reward money. It was hard, back-breaking work, but Elena had never been happier. Every evening they would sit on the porch of the ranch house and watch the sunset, talking about their plans and dreams, their conversations growing deeper and more personal. Vincent told her things he had never told anyone, about the nightmares he still sometimes had about the night his family was attacked, about his fear that he was not good enough to deserve the kind of life he wanted. Elena shared her own fears and insecurities, her grief for her family, her worry that she was not strong enough to make the ranch succeed. And somewhere in all that honesty and vulnerability, friendship deepened into something more. It happened gradually, in stolen glances and accidental touches, in the way Vincent's face lit up when Elena brought him coffee in the morning, in the way Elena felt safe and cherished in his presence. They were falling in love, both of them, though neither said the words out loud. It was Vincent who finally broke the silence. They were working on repairing the barn roof one hot afternoon in July, 3 months after he had first heard Elena's muffled cries in that canyon. Elena handed him a hammer, and their fingers brushed, and Vincent looked down at her with such intensity that her breath caught. "Elena, I need to tell you something," he said. "What is it?" Elena asked, her heart starting to race. Vincent climbed down from the roof and stood in front of her, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. "I love you," he said simply. "I have loved you for weeks now, maybe since the first moment I saw you tied to that tree, and my heart broke for what you were going through. I know we have not known each other long, and I know I am just a cowhand with nothing much to offer. But I love you, and I needed you to know." Elena felt tears start to stream down her face, but she was smiling. "You have everything to offer," she said. "You have your heart and your kindness and your strength, and I love you too. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." Vincent reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "Do not be scared. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this." And then he kissed her, really kissed her, and Elena felt like she was flying. His lips were soft and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and she leaned into him with a sigh. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate, and Elena wound her arms around Vincent's neck, never wanting to let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, but I know what I want. I want you to be my wife. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life working beside you and building our future together. Marry me, Elena." "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a month later in a small ceremony in Old Tucson, with Marshal Garrett giving Elena away and Mrs. Henderson crying happily in the front pew. Elena wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and Vincent wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back and his boots polished until they shone. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Vincent kissed her, Elena felt like her heart might burst with happiness. Their wedding night was spent in the ranch house that was now truly theirs, and Vincent was gentle and patient, treating Elena like she was something precious. He made love to her slowly, learning what she liked, murmuring words of love and devotion against her skin. Elena had been nervous, not knowing what to expect, but Vincent made her feel safe and cherished, and the pleasure was beyond anything she had imagined. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, skin against skin, and talked quietly in the darkness. "I cannot believe this is real," Elena said, tracing patterns on Vincent's chest. "That you are real, that we are here together like this." "I know what you mean," Vincent said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Sometimes I think about how close I came to missing you. If I had been an hour later, or if I had dismissed that sound as just the wind, we might never have found each other." "But you did not miss me," Elena said firmly. "You heard me when no one else could have. You followed and you saved me and you gave me my life back. You gave me this life, this beautiful life with you." "We gave it to each other," Vincent corrected gently. "I was lost before I met you, Elena. Just drifting, with no real purpose. You gave me something to fight for, something to build. You made me believe I could be more than just another hand on someone else's ranch." They made love again, slower and sweeter this time, and fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms as the desert night stretched out around them. The first year of their marriage was hard work, but filled with joy. The ranch began to thrive under their combined efforts, the cattle herd growing, the horses they trained, earning a reputation for quality. Elena learned to rope and brand, to mend fences and deliver calves, and she discovered she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Vincent was patient when she struggled and proud when she succeeded, always her biggest supporter. But it was not just work. They made time for pleasure too, for picnics by the seasonal creek that ran through their property, for dances in old Tucson on Saturday nights, for long rides across their land just to watch the sunset from the high ground. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing the burdens and the joys equally. Elena fell pregnant in the spring of their second year of marriage, and Vincent was over the moon with excitement. He became even more protective than usual, trying to take on all the heavy work and keep Elena from overexerting herself. She had to finally put her foot down and remind him that pregnant women had been doing ranch work since the beginning of time, and she was not going to spend the next 6 months sitting on the porch like an invalid. Their first child was born in December of 1883, delivered by Dr. Harrison with Mrs. Henderson assisting. It was a long, difficult labor, and Vincent paced outside the bedroom door like a caged animal, nearly wearing a hole in the floorboards. But when Elena's cry of pain turned into the wail of a newborn, he burst into the room and found his wife exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle. "It is a boy," Elena said softly, tears streaming down her face. "Vincent, we have a son." Vincent approached the bed like he was walking on holy ground, staring down at the red-faced, squalling infant with absolute wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Can I hold him?" Elena placed the baby in his father's arms, and Vincent cradled him with surprising gentleness for a man with such work-hardened hands. The baby quieted at his father's touch, and Vincent looked up at Elena with so much love it took her breath away. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." They named him Thomas Vincent Fletcher, after the marshal who had helped them and after his father. Little Tommy was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. Vincent doted on him, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about the ranch as soon as he was old enough to sit a horse. 2 years later, their daughter was born, a beautiful girl they named Sarah Rose. She had her mother's fierce spirit and her father's quiet determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was following her brother and father around the ranch, insisting on helping with everything. The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. The ranch prospered, growing from a struggling operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Vincent and Elena bought more land, hired a few hands to help with the work, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. But more important than the success of the ranch was the love that filled their home. Vincent never lost his appreciation for the miracle of his family, for the wife who had come into his life in such a dramatic way, and the children they had created together. Every night he thanked God for the day he had heard Elena's muffled cries and followed them into danger. Elena felt the same. She would watch Vincent working with the children, his patience and gentleness, and marvel at how lucky she was. The tragedy that had brought them together had been terrible, but it had also led her to the love of her life, to the family and home she had always dreamed of. As the children grew, Vincent and Elena made sure to tell them the story of how they had met, not hiding the darkness, but emphasizing the courage and love that had come from it. Tommy and Sarah grew up understanding that bad things happened in the world, but that good people could make a difference, could save lives and create beauty even in the midst of tragedy. Tommy inherited his father's love of ranching and his quiet strength, and everyone knew he would take over the ranch someday. Sarah, on the other hand, had her mother's love of books and learning, and Elena taught her to read and write, nurturing dreams of becoming a teacher, just as Elena had once planned. When Tommy was 10 and Sarah 8, Elena found herself pregnant again, much to everyone's surprise. This time it was twin boys, identical and rambunctious, named Daniel and David. Vincent joked that his hair was going to go gray before he was 40 with 4 children to worry about, but his eyes sparkled with joy every time he said it. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. by the time Tommy was 18 and ready to take on more responsibility. The Fletcher Ranch was known throughout the territory as one of the best. They employed a dozen hands, ran several hundred head of cattle, and their horses were sought after by ranchers from California to Texas. But Vincent and Elena never forgot their roots, never forgot the small, struggling ranch, and the two people who had been brought together by tragedy. They gave generously to their community, helped neighbors in need, and taught their children to do the same. The values of hard work, honesty, and compassion that had guided them from the beginning remained at the heart of everything they did. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Elena back to the spot where he had found her, that canyon where her life had nearly ended and their story had truly begun. They stood together in the fading light, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, and remembered. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Elena asked softly. "If you had not heard me that day." "All the time," Vincent admitted. "But I did hear you, and I followed, and I found you. That is what matters." "You saved my life that day," Elena said, turning to look up at him. "But you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a family to love, a future to look forward to. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything," Vincent said, echoing words he had spoken years before on their wedding night. He cupped her face in his hands, those same strong, gentle hands that had freed her from her bonds all those years ago. "I love you, Elena Fletcher. I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My husband, my partner, my hero. I love you more than words can say." They kissed there in the canyon as the sun set behind the mountains, two people who had been strangers once, but were now so intertwined it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Their love had been born in darkness and danger, but it had grown into something beautiful and strong, something that had created life and hope and a future. Years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. Tommy married a sweet girl from old Tucson and gave them grandchildren, beautiful babies who called Vincent Granddad and climbed all over him while he told them stories. Sarah went east to train as a teacher, fulfilling the dream Elena had once set aside, and came back to start a school in old Tucson. The twins grew into capable young men who helped run the ranch and planned to start their own spread someday. Through it all, Vincent and Elena remained the center of their family, the anchor that held everything together. Their love never diminished, never became routine or taken for granted. Every day they chose each other, worked together, laughed together, faced challenges together. They were still partners in every sense of the word, still best friends and lovers, and each other's greatest supporters. When Vincent turned 55, Elena threw him a surprise party at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends from throughout the territory. As Vincent looked around at the faces of the people he loved, gathered in the home he and Elena had built together, he felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. That night, after everyone had gone home and they lay in bed together, Elena traced the lines on Vincent's face, the silver in his hair, the evidence of years of hard work and laughter and love. "You are still the most handsome man I have ever seen," she said softly. Vincent laughed. "You might need spectacles, my love. I am old and gray." "You are distinguished and wonderful," Elena corrected. "And you are mine. That is all that matters." "Yours forever," Vincent agreed, pulling her close. "From the moment I heard you in that canyon, I was yours, and I will be yours until the day I die and beyond." They made love slowly, gently, bodies still fitting together perfectly after all these years. And afterwards, holding each other in the darkness, they talked about the future, about watching their grandchildren grow, about the legacy they would leave behind. "We have built something good here," Elena said quietly. "Something that will last. Our children and their children will continue what we started. The ranch will go on." "The ranch will go on," Vincent agreed. "But more than that, the values we taught them will go on. Kindness, courage, the willingness to help others even when it is hard or dangerous. That is our real legacy. Elena smiled in the darkness. Because you heard me when no one else could have. Because you followed and saved me. Everything else came from that one moment of courage. No, Vincent said, tightening his arms around her. Everything came from both of us choosing to build a life together. I might have saved you that day, but you saved me too. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. We saved each other. It was a truth they both understood deeply, woven into the fabric of their lives together. They had been brought together by violence and tragedy, but they had chosen love. And that choice, made over and over again every day for more than 20 years, had created something beautiful and lasting. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, the desert night settled peaceful and quiet around the ranch. In the bunkhouse, the hired hands slept soundly. In old Tucson, their daughter Sarah was preparing lessons for her students the next day. Across the territory, Tommy and his wife were putting their children to bed. The twins were checking the cattle one last time before turning in. The world turned and life went on, built on the foundation of love and courage that Vincent and Elena had established all those years ago. And if someone had asked them decades later as they sat together on the porch in their twilight years, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard, what the secret to their happiness was, they would have said it was simple. They had found each other in the darkest moment, and they had held on tight. They had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, partnership over isolation. They had built something together, brick by brick and day by day, that was stronger than any challenge they faced. Vincent Fletcher, the cowboy who had heard a muffled cry and followed it into danger, and Elena Sawyer, the woman whose courage had drawn him to her, lived out their days in the home they had built together. They watched their family grow and thrive. They saw their ranch prosper and become a landmark in the territory. They lived to see Arizona become a state, to see the Wild West they had known slowly transform into something more settled and civilized. But through all the changes, their love remained constant. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, and watch the sun set over the land they had tamed together. And they would remember that day in the canyon, the moment their lives had changed forever, and they would be grateful. Grateful for the courage that had brought them together. Grateful for the love that had sustained them through hard times and good. Grateful for the family they had created and the life they had built. Grateful for each other, every single day until the very end. And when Vincent finally passed away at the age of 78, with Elena holding his hand, and their children and grandchildren surrounding them, his last words were simple and true. "I heard you," he whispered, his blue eyes finding hers one last time. "And I would follow you anywhere." Elena lived 3 more years after Vincent, surrounded by family and love, but with part of her heart always in the grave beside him. When she finally joined him, laid to rest in the small cemetery outside old Tucson, the whole town turned out to mourn the loss of a woman who had touched so many lives. The Fletcher Ranch continued, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But the original story, the tale of the cowboy who heard a woman's muffled cries and followed them into danger, of the love that had bloomed from that moment of courage, became a family legend. It was told to children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren and beyond, a reminder that love could come from the darkest places, that courage could change lives, that 2 people choosing each other every day could build something that lasted forever. And on quiet evenings, when the desert wind whispered through the canyons and the stars came out in their millions, you could almost hear it still. The echo of a muffled cry carried on the wind, and the sound of hoofbeats following close behind, driven by a heart that refused to turn away from someone in need. The beginning of a love story that would last a lifetime and beyond, built on courage and kindness and the simple choice to do what was right.